Science advances one funeral at a time. Max Planck, German physicist. But it does reign true when we talk about health, diet, and the most important medicine that any of us will ever take, and that's the food that we put into our mouth. It's going to determine your relative level of health. It's going to determine what your body composition looks like, how you function, how you think, how you sleep. It's going to affect your hormones. So we wanted to dive into that today. We are back again with my lovely co-host wife, Sarah, and we have brought in another of the Pro Club team that helped make her amazing transformation occurred. Welcome, Corrin.
Hello, hello.
So you were Sarah's dietitian through this
I sure was.
magical transition. So historically for me, in my 20s and 30s, I've always been a gym rat, and I've always had a kind of doughy body. And it's because I constantly was convinced that I could outwork a shitty diet. And 40-something-year-old Chris is here to tell you that after trying every diet plan, every magical pill, every protocol, a good, clean diet is just basically the only way to really having a lean, hard, high-functioning body.
Yeah, what you put in your body every single day. When I was in my grad program, I had someone tell me you make over 200 food choices per day.
Wow.
I mean, it goes as far as what you eat, when you're going to eat it, if you're going to eat. So, I mean, imagine that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to, because I know, like I said, I struggled with diet. I fought it. And I finally, as part of Sarah going through this program, kind of gave in myself and gave it a pretty fair shake. And the results for me as well have been absolutely spectacular. And now it's kind of like, I want to get on the rooftops and be like, listen, people. The problem is, just like everything else in health and fitness, there's so much crap information out there. So I wanted to kind of demystify things with you today of like some basic protocols that can help people get started.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the internet is a great place, but it's also, I think, our greatest downfall at times. So, especially with how much nutrition information is out there, I think people just go in all sorts of directions and then end up making themselves worse in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and it's because, especially like the calories in, calories out, a lot of people will try to say like, oh, it's not that simple. I agree when you're into that fine tuning stage where, you want to be show ready on a stage. Yes, calorie is not a calorie. Mm-hmm. But when you come from, a normal human being and I want to lose, 20 pounds, all it really comes down to is being in a caloric deficit and having a good mixture of the 3 core macros: protein, fat, and carbohydrates.
Yeah, I mean, for weight loss purposes, it really is, when we look at it, breaking it down that simple. I think it depends on the person's goals and how, trying to identify if their goals are realistic. Is it really calories in, calories out for them in that sense? But really, in terms of metabolically and for weight loss purposes, I think it can be broken down very simple in that sense. And also, I think it does matter, especially the macronutrients and how we kind of break them down. That will kind of determine if it's easier to be in a calorie deficit versus harder. So when I think about it, usually protein is it takes the most energy to break down. It's also one of the most satiating foods on top of fiber. And so if we were comparing the same kind of calories from, like, let's say a bagel versus like a chicken breast, it might look a little different. Very different. I think those are kind of the important details that get missed. Yeah. And kind of coming back to what you just said, that's kind of what makes it the very basic, but can be very difficult at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Deceptively simple.
Yeah.
And yet difficult.
Yep. Well, and you and I were talking before this, Sarah, and I was going to talk with people about diet, and she was like, whoa, let's watch that word. And yes. I agree. I hate the word diet because, if you're 48-year-old Doug and you're 6 feet tall and you're 260 pounds of kind of, little doughy, little chubby, and I totally am losing my thought process there. Diet, your life choices, over the last 6 years have gotten you to where you are today. If you want to cut down to 200 pounds and what you're going to do is diet your way to 200 pounds and then go back to eating the exact same way you were previously, guess what, Doug? You're going to be 280 or 300 pounds again in a matter of, a year, 2 years, whatever it takes, that constant excess caloric intake every day. What is it they say about 3,500 excess calories equals a pound?
Something like that. I know it's it's a very standard number, and it can get a little more nuanced than that and everything. But I think what you're referring to is the word diet, I think, has a lot of negative connotations. I like to try to use the word meal pattern or healthy lifestyle pattern or whatever it is, so that it's not super focused on, well, let me just eat this and try this for 3 weeks and see if it works. It's more of looking at one of my biggest things I ask people is, well, in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, do you see yourself eating this way? And if the answer is no, we have a lot of work, because that word diet is really kind of coming back to a short-term plan versus that long-term haul that I think a lot of people try to get to but never fully discover.
Yeah.
And it has the word die in it, so.
Not a great word, right?
Doesn't give you the warm fuzzies.
Yeah, well, and it's funny how many people assume this level of deprivation as part of this program, which has been a nice surprise that, people are like, oh, you just you can't eat anything, or, what can you eat? And that kind of thing. And it's just no, that's not the work that we did together really put an emphasis on making it work with what I eat and making subtle changes here and there that make a difference, and changing, paying attention to the macros, making sure that the protein's high, making sure that the carbs are a little bit lower, and just focusing on it, smaller portion sizes, and getting used to it. And it was super easy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's that perfect blend of macronutrients. You're not low carb. It's just usually we come from a meal pattern for the standard person that is very high in refined carbohydrates, very low in quality protein, and pretty high in I would say more non-nutritious or advantageous fat. And so when we kind of readjust that, it's amazing how easy it is to follow something that keeps you full all day and keeps you feeling really balanced through your energy, and your blood sugar's not going up and down on a roller coaster every day. And it's those really subtle things that make a big difference to make that journey a lot more sustainable. So
yeah. Well, and I found it fascinating as well how simple it became. I sat in one session with
Yes,
you guys,
did.
and I worked with,
Which apparently is not normal.
It's not common, and it's so appreciated. I will have to say that. The spouse is just as much involved as, or the partner or whoever it is, or the family member is just as much involved as the actual client or patient. So
Yeah.
I think it unlocked. I was just telling Sarah a few days ago that it was when she sat down to do this program, she was like, I need you to commit at least for the first 3 months with me to, not be running off to McDonald's and, drinking 3 whiskey Cokes at lunch every day. And not that I would ever do that.
It's usually 4.
But doing it as a team, it obviously she had huge success. And for the first time ever, I had such a level of ease with success. Every time I've been this lean in my life or close to this lean once, and it was such a struggle. It was 6 months of, oftentimes I was doing 2 cardio sessions a day, lifting 3 times a week, and this was the huge shocker. Sarah or Emma would mention ice cream, and I'd be like, no, I'm good. And they're like, are you okay?
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Who are you and what have you done with my husband?
This time around, to be able to, twice a week or whatever, it's we do whatever we want. I feel like pizza. Let's order pizza. I'm going to wash it down with a beer. You don't have to live on chicken and broccoli florets to look good and to feel good. Yeah, maybe you have to be a little more crazy upfront and aggressive to get the weight off. But once you're at a spot that you want to maintain, by then you've probably built up some good skills and habits that allow you to not be hungry and still, eat mostly what you want and stay looking great and feeling great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think how I view it is, if your goal is weight loss, because not everyone has a goal of weight loss or whatever it is, but it just feeling better in general. But if your goal is weight loss, I think it's a matter of, why does it have to have a timeline, this very, distinct timeline, when your goal is to sustain that weight loss for the rest of your life? I usually tell people, try it out for a little bit, see how you feel. There's no harm in trying to maintain your weight for a while, coming back to it. So I think a lot of us get really stressed and over concentrate on this one singular goal, whatever it is. But I guess in this case, if it is weight loss, and we don't kind of look at the big picture of it can take a while to get to that.
Yeah.
And maybe it should take a while, because if it takes more time, it usually means it'll last longer.
Stay.
Yeah. And that's a hard conversation to have with clients and individuals, because they are so stuck on one singular idea. And I think for you, when I was talking to you constantly, it was very this is the rest of my life. How do I do things to make sure I can travel and eat? How do I do things to make sure and sustain these goals for the long run? And I think those are really important conversations to have and make sure they're done before I let a client out of my office forever. I put quotes around forever, but for a longer period or duration. It's just really important to know kind of your why and not put so much pressure on a timeline as well. That's a big key in it all.
Well, and I see so many people as they start out into some type of, fitness or alternative eating patterns, because I don't say diet, people become discouraged so rapidly. We'll take somebody who's, 30 or 40 pounds overweight. They go buy some new running shoes. They start eating better. And 2 weeks in, they're like, I'm only down 2 pounds. It's like,
or not at all.
Or not at all, or maybe even up a little bit. It's like you've ignored your eating patterns for 3 solid years. And on some level, you're probably not putting the best stuff or the right amounts of stuff into your body. And you had no problem slowly gaining that weight over 3 years. But suddenly in 2 weeks, when you don't see a huge change in the scale, you're like, fuck it, I'm out. I'm not supposed to say that word either. I'm trying to clean it up for you folks.
I think it's only been once.
Yeah. We get the F counter.
It's
all good.
Baby steps. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think it's important to go back to talking about the support. And, that was kind of one of my conditions of doing this program was I need you to be on board with me and I need you to be working with me. And, we've talked a number of times about how important it is to have your person with you, not with you, but supporting you and helping you attain your goals instead of either being a neutral or taking away from them.
Yep.
And there were a lot of times, when you were ripped up the first time, that we weren't on board because we weren't interested in pursuing that. So it's harder to maintain, it's harder to access. And so I think just being really clear about making sure that your people are able to support you is really important.
Well, and I realize, looking back, how difficult it would have been because, here I am, running through drive-thrus and bringing home pizza, and you're, trying to focus on losing weight. Or, folks with kids, especially when they're little or smaller, a lot of times they need so many calories. You get to the point where you're like, look, if you'll eat macaroni and cheese or whatever you'll eat, it's like you just need raw calories. And there's some extra macaroni and cheese. Well, I finished my dinner. I'll clean that up too. And, you do that over 3, 5, 8 years. It's like, wow, what happened to my body? I'm more round all of a sudden.
Or, you used to have a habit of literally just whatever was leftovers, he would finish it. It didn't matter if I made enough for 3 or 5 or 8 or 10. He would just pile it in until he couldn't handle it anymore. And he's joked a number of times, why would I stop eating? I don't hate myself yet.
Oh my gosh, it sounds like my partner. He's the sauce guy. So I make a sauce and I double it. Then he eats all the sauce and he's like, next time make 4
batches.
4. And then I make it and then he does all 4 and he's like, this wasn't enough sauce. And I'm like, I literally doubled the recipe and it just doesn't matter. So it sounds very similar to the situation.
I'm a sauce person too.
Pasta soup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess where I wanted to go today, I guess I wanted to introduce the terms of BMR and RMR. Those are important. Beta metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, basically the number of calories you burn just laying at bed rest. And you can go through some, exotic testing at the Pro Club, for instance, where they will actually figure out what your BMR or RMR is. And then from there, it's really easy. I know mine happens to be just over 2,600 calories. So I'm like, okay, depending on how hard my workout's going to be today and how many calories I anticipate burning, with my movement, I track stuff with the Aura Ring. It's really easy to figure out, okay, I'm going to work out for 700 calories today. I want to be at a caloric deficit. If I eat, 2,800 calories today, I'll be at a caloric deficit. Is there a good general for that? Because a lot of folks, the metabolic testing is not as
Realistic.
accessible
Yeah.
for a lot of folks. And, FDA or whatever, the 2,000 calorie a day food pyramid, which is complete garbage, but we can go into that another day. Is there a good, generally speaking, women are about this? And I mean, I know the size of your person and whatnot.
Yeah,
affects
yeah. No, exactly. So resting metabolic rate is essentially trying to, like you said, calculate the amount of calories you would burn if you're just like resting in bed, not fully asleep, just resting. So that's just to do your basic functions of your body, like your heart to beat, you to breathe. And we know that what gets put on top of that to kind of create what's called your total daily energy expenditure, or the amount of calories you would burn just to maintain your weight. We have a little bit coming from what's called the thermic effect of food. So you actually do burn a little bit from eating. And then we also have our physical activity and our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So physical activity could be like you lifting at the gym or going for a run. And then the non-exercise activity thermogenesis is coming from like you moving around the house and going for walks,
Going
and
up and down the stairs.
cooking and all of, or cleaning, cooking, all of that kind of stuff. And so to kind of get that base number, that RMR, which is the majority of the calories that you burn, there's so many ways you can do it. So like you said, at the Pro Club, they have a fancy way. It's a metabolic cart, which is like kind of the gold standard. You lay in like this little bubble chamber, and it's essentially just like when you're at rest, measuring how much carbon dioxide you're putting out and oxygen you're breathing in. And then other ways you can do it, I just say we have great kind of calculations based off research. There's some tools that I use like just online that I think a general person can use. The one that I gravitate towards, I think, is online. It's called Ideal Nutrition Calculator, or Calorie Calculator. I can send you the link if you want to share it. One of our sports dietitians kind of referenced it a lot, and I started using it for my clients, and it's really comprehensive. Because it uses those calculations. They're based off of like your age, your sex, your body weight, and then it can kind of use that to estimate what a calorie deficit could be for you and what your resting metabolic rate could be. And so it's a really helpful number to know, especially like regardless of your goals. If you want to gain weight, if you want to lose weight, if you want to maintain your weight, it's helpful to know that kind of number and kind of use that to base your goals off for the day. Like you said, you can kind of gauge, well, I know I'm burning this amount. If I want to maintain my weight, I know I need to eat more because I exercise more, or a little bit less. And so that's kind of how I reference it for people. And I think just having that online calculator can be used by all people. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But that begs the question of whether people are willing to go the next step, which is meal tracking.
Well, that was
so that you know not only what you need, but what you're adding to
as well as the fact, at some point you probably, whether it's a Fitbit or an Aura Ring or some type of energy tracker, so you can kind of see what you're burning throughout the day, compare it against the numbers that you've found. And then we're going to dive into that subject.
Right. But even if you're thinking like what we talked about with Dean in the last podcast, and you and I talked about it quite extensively, is paying attention to the cues of our body and really being aware of why it is that we're eating, and asking those questions like, am I eating because I'm hungry, or am I eating because I'm bored? Am I finishing this because I feel like I need to, or because I actually am still wanting to have sustenance? And cues for me, like, do I wake up hungry? If I wake up hungry, then I feel like I hit the sweet spot of going to bed, making sure that I'm not hungry as I'm going to bed, if I, can help it. And then, trying to make sure that I'm waking up hungry. Um, Paying attention to those physiological cues in the absence of having the opportunity to have these gadgets and gizmos and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, those things, everything has air. Like, just everything does. I mean, the metabolic cart I just talked about has air. If you didn't fast before it, if you weren't fully at rest, like that in itself has air. So we can just know that it is really important still to listen to our cues of our body. I always tell people meal tracking is really hard to do if you like really want to be good at it. And a lot of people just don't even know how. Like, they just don't even know how.
I was a lunatic about it.
Yeah. So everyone, I mean, that's the problem you do have with any sort of like data that you're trying to collect on yourself is like, where is that error? Is it one way or is it the other way?
How bad is the error?
Yeah. I always tell people the FDA allows like a 20% error on nutrition labels.
That shocked me when you told me
I know.
that.
I was like,
20%.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I got that percentage right, but the last time I checked, that was what it was. I mean, that's just how it is because, one day they could be manufacturing it, processing it another way, and the next time it could be slightly different. So,
Yep.
Even if you try your hardest, there could still be that little bit of error that you're not really fully aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I personally, meal tracking has been basically impossible for me. I've tried a number of times, and I will say, even if you do it for a short period, it's especially if you're getting started, it's so important. And there's a bunch of different apps. What is the app that you're using right now?
MyFitnessPal.
MyFitnessPal. It's a freebie as well, if I recall correctly. And it's got most barcodes, and you can enter stuff by hand. It's got all kinds of great stuff. Even just doing it for a week, I think, is really enlightening for people because, like we were just talking about, sauces, drinks. You don't realize gum,
Condiments.
these things that you don't realize. You're like, okay, the meal is 700 calories. Oh, well, I slathered it in butter and sauce and this and that. It's like, oh, actually, it's 1,200 calories. Like, people don't realize it. So when you do some of that tracking, you start to get a reality of some of your blind spots of where you're like, oh, I'm getting a lot more calories daily than I actually thought, which can really help guide some of those choices.
Yeah, well, and also the farther away you get from whole foods, the easier it is to lose track of what is
What's
in
in
it and how it is impacting you. So, I made a pretty good practice of being able to kind of spitball what a recipe would be based on, what the different components were and like, oh, that's probably this much of that and this much of that. And it was really helpful. But when you don't know how it was made and you don't know what all of the ingredients are, especially in processed foods, it's a lot harder to know. And it's usually pretty shocking.
Yeah, no, I mean, and there's so many different ways you can meal track. Like, I don't have everyone using MyFitnessPal. I don't have everyone like tracking calories. I think it really comes down to like your relationship with food because tracking calories can lead down some pretty dangerous paths. And you kind of got to watch out for those cues for people. If they're becoming obsessive, if they're, making food decisions based off of, well, I only have like 200 calories left. So like all I'm eating for dinner is lettuce. I mean, that's a really big sign. I'm like, we need to step away from this. But, picture tracking is something I use with people. Like, they just take pictures of their food. They write down.
Oh,
Yeah, they write down.
good.
And what's nice is then, you can see like your week in a visual and they can kind of look and be like, oh, wow, I had a lot less vegetables than I thought I did. It's really not colorful here. So that's really helpful for people. I have, people using kind of hunger and fullness cue scales. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, how hungry were you before the meal and then after how full were you, trying to get in the sweet spot of like starting to eat when you're at a 4 and kind of finishing when you're at a 7 is a really great way. So that's really helpful. Or sometimes I have people use the plate model where it's like, generally speaking, try to aim for your plate looking like this when you go for a meal or a snack. And so that can be helpful. So that it's not like just one way to do it.
Yeah, a lot of different protocols.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you just have to really try to figure out like, well, I at least when I'm talking to someone, but for the person out there that's trying to figure this out on their own is like try to ask yourself what is actually, like you said, for you, it's maybe not calorie tracking. And for you, you were like, oh, this is fine. And see which one works better. Because like I said, there's like 30,000 ways to do the same thing.
Yep.
And pretty much everything in life. So
Well,
the
and
same ways, yeah.
you're going to have the highest level of success with whatever you're most likely to stick to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to, what was the gal's name that I worked with at ProGlub there for a while? She's gone now, unfortunately.
Sequoia? No.
I'm trying to think, when did you work with her?
Shoot.
About a year ago.
Savannah?
Yes.
Savannah.
Yes.
So we struggled through.
Another GMC.
So we struggled through with me trying to meal track, and
Yeah.
I was falling off of it pretty quickly. And she sat me down at one point and was just like, look, you've said that you're interested in losing fat while maintaining or gaining muscle. So she was like, really, our focus with you should just be protein. She was like, I want you to do nothing but focus on your protein macro. You need 200 plus grams a day, every day. The second I started doing that, the goal was, she was just like, look, every time you eat protein, always with every meal. And you work towards 200. By the time I got to 200 or above,
you don't want to eat anything
I was
else.
never hungry.
You feel like you swallowed a bowling ball.
I know. I mean, that's, like I said, it takes a lot of energy to just digest that protein.
Just to break that protein down.
Yeah, so.
But that was the magic trick for me. Like all of a sudden, years and years of like, I can't do this. It's too hard. It was just like, by virtue of just getting my protein up, that forced the adjustment down on my carbohydrates. And magically weird, every time I'm going in and getting a DEXA scan, I've added some muscle. I've lost some fat. It's like we're trending the right way. And it's very low impact for me in terms of, I don't have to write down everything I put in my mouth. It's just like, I got 27 grams of protein at breakfast, I'm just, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that was another thing that has been really nice about our process was I kind of hopped on the protein bus too with you. And what we did was take those items that might be snacks or desserts or something like that and found protein dense versions of those that still taste like you're treating yourself.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what I kind of tell people, or what I have them focus on, is that protein. Like I said, majority of the people that come to me are very low on protein, usually higher on, I should specifically say, refined carbohydrates, because I don't want people to get in their mind that carbohydrates are bad. They are not bad.
Yeah.
It's just the quality, like everything else. So what I like to have people do is really focus on balancing their blood sugar, is kind of what I think what I really work on with people. And because of that, and why that's a focus, especially for me, is that if you're going, like I said, through that roller coaster every single day, you're having more refined carbohydrates, not enough protein, not enough fiber, you're going to quickly spike your blood sugar. It's going to come down really quickly, and you're just going to be hungry again. And so protein especially is really helpful at kind of keeping it balanced throughout the day. So if you're going to have a sweet treat or a fun food that you really want to enjoy, trying to either encourage yourself to eat it closer to a meal that's more protein dense or with a protein option can be a really great way to kind of balance your hunger and make yourself feel more satiated throughout the meal. And so that can be a really great little tip and trick for people, and they typically find that works really well for them. So,
well, especially when you start going through, your pantry and your refrigerator and looking at, 3 years ago, we've got bagels and we've got, cookies and ice cream and all. It's like, yeah, we enjoy eating that stuff. Like, okay, let's go find a lower carb bagel that has some protein in it. We've just got a ton now of different like protein bars, protein muffins, chips, all kinds of stuff, lower carbohydrate, higher protein. And by virtue of just having those here, when it's, you're feeling snacky, it's like, cool, you go down and instead of, running to the gas station around the corner and grabbing a Snickers bar and a Coke.
Or Doritos.
Yeah. Just having it there, having the better options as your only option in the home, you just get a big win really easy.
Yeah, no, exactly. So if those things are readily available to you and accessible, you're much more likely to use them. I do encourage people to not look at like this as black and white. Like you can't have anything in your home that is, what you would feel is enjoyable if it is refined carbohydrates or like the cookies or the Doritos. Like if you heavily restrict yourself and say, I cannot have those at all, you're much more, I think about it as like a rubber band effect. Like you're much more likely then in, let's say, a couple weeks to come back and just only eat Doritos.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
try to work. I really do encourage people to try to work those foods into their meal plan. Because you're bound to have them at some point in your life. You just are. You're never
Yeah.
gonna avoid them.
Well, and you want to enjoy life.
Yeah. And I was very upfront with Corrin. I was like, not willing to give up peanut butter cups. Like,
I was like, neither am I.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, being not only allowed to, but encouraged to have those things in a moderate amount so that it didn't make me feel like I was being deprived was very, very important.
Exactly.
I just wanted to kind of try to come up with some, we've covered some tips and tricks, getting the better options into your home, kind of getting an idea of what your caloric needs are. If you were going to try to describe a pretty population-wide diet protocol, and I don't want to say diet, but lifestyle protocol that is great. I know like 40-40-30 is is it 40-30-30? Sorry. So 40% carbohydrate, 30 fat, 30 protein tends to be a kind of a gold standard, I guess. Do you feel that fits well? Or like I said, because I lean towards, I'm probably thinking more like, for me, probably closer to 50% protein and then splitting fat and carb up.
Yeah, everyone's really different. And I think a good starting place is what I tell people is, okay, if your goal is weight loss, like I said, not everyone's goal is that. But if it is that, sure, first focus on trying to find what is actually a reasonable, moderate calorie deficit. Just because you can eat less doesn't mean you should. But trying to find that sweet spot and then focusing on the protein. I like to start around the 30-ish mark. Some people 35, for you if it's 50. Just depends on how much protein and what people can readily get to. I usually try to figure out, well, what were you eating before? And if your protein was only 10%, to ask someone to come up to 30% is like,
that's a big
not
jump.
gonna happen. And so I try to make those small jumps of like, can we get up 5% or something like that? That's a reasonable start. I usually try to look at it more visually. Like I said, I kind of come back to this plate model of if you were to look at it from like an actual food perspective rather than maybe numbers, it would be more like a third to a half your plate of non-starchy vegetables like leafy greens, carrots, zucchini, all that kind of stuff. A quarter of your plate to a third of your plate of really high quality complex carbohydrates. So I think of the carbs with a lot of fiber in them. And then like a third to a quarter of your plate being protein options, and then using kind of like fat sources as toppings and dressings and sauces and stuff like that, or methods of cooking. So if you're roasting or pan frying or things like that. And that can be kind of a good way to segue people into maybe more of this macronutrient distribution if they want to become more advanced with like like you said, 30% protein, if that's, what I think is reasonable, depending on, let's say, like their lean body mass, or based off of, if they're carbohydrates, if they're a lot more endurance exercise or really high intensity exercise, it might do a little more carbohydrate. Like little things like that do matter, but I think it can be kind of a good starting place is kind of what you were talking about. So
You touched on something that I think is interesting because I hear a lot of folks that like to do this starvation diet. This seems to be a popular one, and I don't
Or
think
intermittent fasting.
different
things.
We can definitely come to intermittent fasting. The one that scares me though is so many people where it's like I'm going to take in 400 calories a day. It's like, as I understand it, it has hugely deleterious effects. And in fact, you can end up tricking your body basically into going into starvation mode. So the calories you do take in are just like store as fat, store as fat, store as fat.
Yeah, so like basically metabolically, it's not good to do that because I always tell people first, again, the rubber band effect, you're never going to keep that up the rest of your life. Second, when you're eating that little and it's really hard to get all the micronutrients that your body needs on a very restrictive diet. So I think about long-term health in that sense. And then finally, when you are in such an extreme calorie deficit, and you kind of, sure, you would first, your body's going to first kind of want to tap into its fat stores, but you could start pulling from lean body tissue. And then what you've essentially done is taken away something like muscle. And if you go back to the way you're eating and you have less muscle than what you started with, then your resting metabolic rate that what we talked about is now potentially lower.
Mhm.
Yep.
And that's why people might see like what we call weight cycling happen, where they go on extreme kind of yo-yo dieting and crash dieting, is they can kind of come back to their weight, if not gain more weight
Go
after.
past it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so and it can be very harmful, like for hormone balance. That's a
Yeah.
huge one. So I think about thyroid, especially if I have females of reproductive age. That's a major concern for me. Just because you're not underweight, and you may be at a higher weight, you can still experience hormonal disruptions like amenorrhea.
Mhm.
What is I've
So
never heard of that.
amenorrhea is like loss of your menstrual cycle.
Oh,
That's,
wow.
I mean, and that's something that we're starting to learn. Just because you're not at a underweight or you're not classified as underweight based on BMI, you can still have extreme.
I've actually heard of a lot of like stage caliber, like fitness competitors and whatnot,
Yeah.
with females going into that state
Yeah,
where they get
exactly.
incredibly lean.
Yeah, I mean, your body, especially females, they need more body fat to be healthy. And it's not something people want to hear, but it is very true. So, and also when you're doing extreme calorie diets that are extremely restrictive diets where potentially your blood sugar is going all over places too, is cortisol rises too. So we have that stress hormone, and it's just things get so out of whack so quickly. And sometimes it takes a while for your body to come back.
So yeah, recalibrate.
Yeah, and so I really do encourage people, to do very moderate calorie deficits, to take breaks from, trying to lose weight or trying to be in a calorie deficit. And again, kind of come back to like, why am I doing this if it's going to be that restrictive? So,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something really important, especially if you're one of those folks, in your 30s to older, especially past 40. I think hormones have such a tremendous effect on how you feel and how your
mhm.
body is composed. Especially, I can speak to men quite a bit. Your testosterone starts to drop, and
Mhm.
it's harder to put on muscle. It's easier to put on fat. If your hormones are out of whack, if you've been struggling with your diet for a long time and you're not making any progress, you might want to go and get a blood panel done to check your hormones, because
Yeah,
I've seen lots of examples of folks that, they were doing all the right stuff and they
it
just weren't
wasn't
making any progress.
working. Yeah.
They go get their hormones adjusted and it's like, boop, their body just magically.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I have a very special interest in like endocrinology, so like
Yep.
hormone balance and everything like that, specifically like women's nutrition and stuff. Just because I think for too long have we been told to exercise more, eat less.
Yeah.
And that has just become so like just with social media and doctors telling people, just patients to do those types of things and not thinking about the repercussions it can have. And I think we've made our population unhealthier
Yeah.
for that reason. So, the more I can encourage people to like, sure, get maybe some further testing done. I also encourage people, have your doctor look over medications, because medications can cause weight gain.
Mhm.
And to review your stress, your sleep, like all of these other components, because like you said, you could be doing everything, when I put quotes around right, but you could be doing everything you can that you feel is correct for your body, and it could still not go in the direction that
Glean any
yeah.
results.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's another interesting thing, with the hormone panels. I just recently was reading a study and I didn't realize, lots of folks deal with, chronic pain issues,
Mhm.
end up on opioids for some period of time.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the correlation that opioids just crash the hormonal system. So if you've been
Yeah.
long-term dealing with pain issues, you're a really good candidate to go and get your hormonal panels looked at to make sure that things are squared up so you can have the highest level of success when you decide to make some life
Some
and eating
changes.
changes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I just say like don't just put all your your like tokens into nutrition or exercise. Try to look at it as like the holistic version of everything,
Mhm.
and make sure you're as healthy as you can be from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then kind of go deeper into more of those very specific things that you
Yeah.
can. So,
And I've seen a lot of success with that. I recently read a book, Atomic Habits,
mm,
and it's literally just what the title says. It's those little things that add up cumulatively. So it's, the most success I've ever had with my dieting was around just like, okay, like this week I'm gonna like cut my soda intake, almost to zero. Like do that for a couple of weeks. Okay, now I'm gonna try to eat, maybe I eat sandwiches every day. Like, I'm going to try to skip a day a week. You start doing these little things and they slowly add up over time, 6 months, a year later, like, wow, I look different. I feel different. And you didn't really notice a difference. It adds up quickly.
Yeah.
So what else do we want to, what do we want to talk about? Like I said, I just want to give people a primer of like how to get started, how to be successful. Because, I spent 20 plus years being super frustrated and I just finally tripped upon, like, that's the thing. Just keep trying. You will get there 100%.
Sure.
Do you have any other thoughts about, great ways to kind of to get folks started?
Ooh, that one's a good one. I think, again, I think something I talked to you about, Sarah, was you kind of have to start from a place of love for your body. This is something I don't think gets really talked about. A lot of my clients come in just so mad at themselves, so upset at themselves about letting themselves get to a certain place. And again, I put quotes around that. And I think we had a really good conversation once about like, I'm doing this because I love my body. I'm doing this because I care about my body. And so I just really encourage people to focus on starting from a place of love, like trying to get there, whatever place it is. And I don't know if you can speak on that, but I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big part of me that just really wanted to make sure that I could be in what I envisioned for myself in my mind, and that does definitely come from a place of, I suppose you could whip yourself like, a horse, but like as you are doing it with a loving intention, it makes it so much more powerful, right? But it's a hard place to get to because it's really easy to get discouraged and to look at yourself and go, man, I do not resonate with how I appear. And to know that, maybe the person that you're with isn't necessarily resonating with it either, or you're not able to do the things that you'd like to do or not do them as well. It is really easy to get discouraged. And so, being able to find the beauty in where you are and acceptance for how you got there. And like, I had a bunch of reasons, but recognizing that the reasons don't matter. You're here. And if you're going to try and make a change, it needs to be, a change that makes you feel better about yourself. So,
yeah, I mean, if you're beating yourself up constantly, like you are the quality of your thoughts.
oh, absolutely.
If you're telling yourself that you're fat and you're incapable, guess what? You're going to stay fat and incapable. But if you're like, look, I'm on the road to getting healthier. Like I'm taking steps to change the patterns in my life and to improve the quality of my life. Like,
yeah,
success is guaranteed. You just have to stay on that trail.
Yeah. Well, and this whole journey was for me. Like that was really the biggest thing about it.
Yeah.
It was for me, and it was my time to decide that I was going to put my money where my mouth was, and literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And put the effort in to be on the outside what I felt like on the inside.
No, I think that's really where it comes down to. I think a lot of people do it because they think their partner is going to see them differently or the world's going to see them differently. And that's why I really try to dig out, like, why are you doing this? If you're just doing it just to, like, I don't know, look better in pictures or whatever that is.
I want to hate myself less.
Yeah, and that's not true because what I often see is I'll have people be whatever their definition of success is, and then they'll get to where we talked about them getting, and then they just they still are at the same place they started. They still don't like themselves, and they just keep going further. And I'm like, well,
then it gets unhealthy.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm just like, well, when are you going to stop? And I really do encourage people to try to figure out like a greater why. Is it because, you could move better, your mobility could be better, if we just get you more metabolically healthy, like your A1C can go down, so like your fasting blood sugar can go down, your lipids could be better. These are all other signs that we're like on the right path. So I think there should be other markers of success as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we've had a lot of conversations, Chris and I, about his fitness goals in terms of like, oh, I want to be 205 at 6% body fat, or I want to be able to
225, but whatever. 220, 221.
whatever it takes. But just these goals that are almost like professional in nature, where he's like, I want to be cut up by like a professional bodybuilder, and sitting and talk, or I want to be able to bench press however much, or those types of things. And me looking at him and going, well, why?
Yeah, why?
Like, what is it about that is so important to you that that's a goal that you push so hard to attain? And when it's obviously the opposite side of the conversation about weight loss, which is, building muscle and making sure you're strong. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on what drives you like that, because it has become almost obsessive at times.
Oh, absolutely. And we did, I think, unearth a real gem along that road. And that was, I was small and chubby as a kid and got picked on a lot. And I had this, law enforcement dad and brother that were both, 6'4" and built, and like, I thought of them as superheroes, and nobody messed with those guys. So in my mind, by being bigger than the average human being and stronger and, more intimidating and all these things, it was literally just a safety thing to me.
Yeah.
It's not that I wanted to fight with people, but generally speaking, if you're gigantic, people don't want to mess with
back
you.
off, yeah.
Exactly. And as I'm getting a little more wise in my age, I realize it's like, I'm not even going to invite myself into the scenarios where those types of altercations are likely to occur. It's like, I want to be a peaceful human being. And it's gotten to the point, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done rounds of anabolic steroids and got quite large at times, to the point that people were very regularly making comments about like, holy shit, dude, you're getting huge. And it happens. It's just like gaining weight, bad weight, if you will, or I shouldn't say bad weight, but fat, gaining a ton of muscle. It happens slowly. And you don't recognize it. And then all of a sudden, lots of people are making comments. And it's like, I'm a normal sized human being. And I'll be having conversations with Sarah. And she's like, no, you're not. you look weird.
You're bumpy in a lot of spots.
And the interesting thing was, for the longest time, I was just fascinated with being huge. And interestingly enough, just in the last year or so, I decided I had some injuries I was recovering from, and just decided to focus on body composition in terms of leaning down. And I'm the leanest I've ever been right now, DEXA at like 16 and change %. I feel so good. And when I really started to look at my goals, like, what do I want to do? I want to age gracefully. I want to be athletically capable in more of an endurance type of realm. Yet here I was doing, very bodybuilder-esque type of training, huge rest periods between, 3 and 4 rep type
no
sets.
cardio whatsoever.
I'd go in and do a workout with she and Dean and just get murdered. I can pick up dump trucks, but I can't jog for 5 minutes.
Yeah. I will have to say, not many people have to pick up a dump truck every day.
Well, I know, and that was I just recently had my whole safety thing debunked, because my goal was, as a young man, I'm going to get huge and I'm going to do martial arts my whole life, and nobody will mess with me. Kind of worked, but somebody recently, I think it might have been Ryan Humiston or something, was making fun of some bodybuilder, and don't quote me on if it was Ryan Humiston or not, but you're going to get in a fight in a grocery store, and you're going to throw somebody through a window. And it's like, what did I learn in martial arts? Every time I've gotten my ass kicked, it's been by somebody smaller and more agile and capable. It's like, size is somewhat of an indicator. It will probably keep people at bay, but if it really comes to a physical altercation, being gigantic probably is not even going to be an advantage. Like, it's all psychological stuff that I made up stories about my whole life. And then I tuned my diet around, and I didn't know much about diet and nutrition. So I eat lots of complex carbohydrates. I lift heavy stuff, and why am I always like 30% body fat? I don't get it. I work out constantly. Like, and 20 or 30 years in, here I am just starting to crack the code on it. And that's why I feel like these conversations are so important. And I think you really hit it. Having people understand the psychology of what their goals are. Because look, if it's legitimately just like, I want to look good in a bikini, which I obviously want to look good in a bikini.
And your definition of what looks good in a bikini is different among everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding what your goals are, I think are very important to success long term.
And that's why we have people. I heavily encourage, if they're not in the program, or if they're in the program, they need to seek counseling. I don't care who you are, because that's a really key place to talk about it and figure it out and talk through it. Because then you start uncovering some really important things. So
Yeah, like, my grandmother used to have pie and cake for us every time we showed up, and it was the way that she loved us. And so, to create that feeling of food equals love, or food equals safety, or food equals, whatever it is for you. If you have a thing with food, it's very easy to see how that happens and to kind of misplace that. So trying to pull that apart and understand it more and maybe be more mindful about it. And I think that really the process of paying attention to it is as important, if not more so, than how you go about making the changes.
Exactly.
So,
well, very cool. There are there things you guys want to talk on? I'm open to whatever.
I'd say I'm good.
You're good. Yeah, I think. Overall, you did an amazing job. I think that it always comes back to. I tell people we live in a gray world, not a gray world, not in a black and white world. And so that's the favorite color. So I think for you, you were just really trying to kind of navigate that. And at the end, we really worked on like a lot of those body cues, hunger and fullness cues, and just trying to kind of meet in the middle. Overall, I always tell people the advice I usually give people is very boring. It's usually what you already probably know, and I always hate to tell people, but usually the boring the better, or the more boring. So the more boring nutrition advice, and the more just kind of regular, sustainable, kind of, I don't know, not very I would say
Not very whiz bang.
Yeah, like easy fad kind of stuff.
It's easy to track if you're doing simple stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of the key thing.
Be patient, have grace for yourself, give yourself the opportunity to kind of go in between the guardrails and, make good choices better than not if you can help it, and just be thinking about it. Pay attention to it.
Yeah. You only get one meat vehicle. Take care of it,
Yeah.
You don't buy a $200,000 car and put crap gas in it, do you? Like, you've got one.
You'd be a chump if you did.
Yeah. Alrighty, folks. Well, be healthy, be well, take good care of yourselves.
Thank
Love
you,
on
Corrin.
people around you.
Thank
I'm only as good as the team that helped me, and it was
thank
an
you.
amazing team. So
Yes,
very lucky.
Yes, you were an amazing client. So.
Woohoo.
Love y'all. Thank you much.
Bye.